You thought she was the answer, but she was just the mirror, and when it cracked, so did everything you thought made you a man. This isn't about hating women. It's about waking up from the spell they were never aware they cast. Because Jung saw something most men still can't name. What you fall in love with is not her. It's your unconscious, dressed in a woman's skin. Every heartbreak, every obsession, every silent collapse, they weren't about her body, her beauty, or her betrayal. They were about you, the parts of you that never learned to speak, now screaming through the silence she left behind. You didn't lose her. You lost the story you built around her presence, and now you're standing in the ruins, not of love, but of illusion. What if she was never your future? What if she was your reflection, sent to destroy the man you were pretending to be? You weren't obsessed with her. You were obsessed with the illusion. The one that said, "If I'm good enough, she'll finally see me." But she never saw you, only the mask you wore and the script you performed. You made yourself a puppet of her approval, and she never asked for the strings. She didn't break your heart. She just let your performance collapse. Every compliment she gave landed on your wounds, not your worth. She loved your silence, your service, your softness, not because she cherished you, but because you never made her confront your truth. She wasn't cruel. She was unconscious. But you betrayed yourself with every unspoken boundary. Jung warned us, until you integrate your inner feminine, you'll keep chasing her outside. That's what the anima projection is. Not romance, regression. You thought she was your redemption, but she was your rehearsal for the love you never learned to give yourself. She didn't reject you. She rejected the role you begged her to play. You weren't in a relationship. You were in a ritual, one where you offered her worship, hoping she'd crown you king. But kings don't kneel, and love, real love, doesn't reward self-abandonment. It punishes it, slowly, quietly, until you become the man she never respected. You weren't addicted to her smile. You were addicted to how it made you forget your reflection. You built your entire self-worth around her attention and then blamed her for walking away. But how can someone stay when she never met the man behind the devotion? She was not your path, she was your mirror. And mirrors don't lie, they reflect. The emptiness you felt when she left, it wasn't hers. It was yours, because you never showed her the man beneath the myth. You didn't grieve her. You grieved the story, the fantasy of being finally enough, the myth of being saved by being useful. You weren't in love with her. You were in love with the mask you wore when she smiled. And now the mask is gone, and the mirror is cracked. What's left? Not failure, but a man, finally alone with his own soul. You didn't love the way she touched you. You loved the way she hurt you, because pain felt familiar, and familiarity feels like truth. She made you feel insignificant, and that made you feel real, like finally someone saw through your mask. But what she saw was your hunger, not your essence. Her coldness wasn't a flaw, it was the drug. Because you were never taught to receive warmth without suspicion. Love for you was always a battlefield, and when she made you bleed, it felt like home. Not because it was love, but because it resembled the chaos that raised you. Jung warned us, where power rules, love vanishes. But you weren't chasing love, you were chasing correction. You wanted her disapproval to prove your worth through suffering, and every time she pulled away, you leaned in harder. Not to win her back, but to prove you were strong enough to be unwanted. It wasn't her attention you needed, it was her cruelty, the emotional echo of every voice that said, "You're not enough." You thought enduring her moods made you resilient, but it only made you a puppet for a war she didn't even know she was waging. And the battlefield was your self-respect. This wasn't intimacy. This was masochism dressed in devotion. You weren't loving her. You were reenacting your trauma. She became the test you kept failing on purpose, because every failure felt like proof that you were still trying, still alive, still loyal to your invisible wound. Real strength isn't staying silent while someone tears you down. It's walking away when your soul starts whispering, "We've been here before." You mistook exhaustion for loyalty. You thought surviving her was your role, but surviving isn't living. It's a slow disappearance. You never wanted love. You wanted a war you could win. A battle where your bleeding would finally earn a blessing. But blessings don't come through humiliation. They come when you refuse to kneel to what wounds you. And that's where real masculinity begins, in refusal, not endurance. She didn't make you feel like a man. She made you feel like a boy, still waiting for permission to be one. But manhood isn't granted by cruelty. It's forged in the moment you stop seeking meaning through pain and start protecting the parts of you that still remember peace. You called it stoicism, but it was just muteness, inherited from men who bled in silence and called it strength. You learned early, feel less, survive more. So you swallowed grief like it was ritual, and every word you never said became a scar beneath your ribs. You didn't know how to speak, not because you lacked words, but because your father never showed you how to use them. He passed you the armor, not the manual. And now you confuse repression with composure, as if silence were the mark of a man, not his slow disappearance. Jung warned, "What you don't bring to consciousness becomes fate." And that's what happened. You wore the mask too long. It fused with your skin. You think you're being strong, but really you're just hiding behind the absence of expression. She asked you how you felt, and you said, "I'm fine." But your eyes told the truth. Exhausted, drowning, unspoken. She didn't leave because you were broken. She left because you were unreachable, and you mistook her leaving as proof that silence is safer. But it's not. It's a prison with velvet walls. Comfortable, respectable, deadly. Every time you withheld your truth, you sacrificed intimacy. Every time you smiled through pain, you handed your soul over like it was negotiable. And now you don't even know what your voice sounds like without the mask. Emotional sovereignty doesn't mean hiding. It means bleeding consciously, without apology, without shame, to cry without collapsing, to speak without rehearsing, to be visible without a reason. You think she couldn't love you, but she couldn't love the version of you who never let her in, because you thought feeling made you weak, but all it did was make you unknowable. And no one loves a ghost, not even the kindest woman. This isn't about becoming soft, it's about becoming whole. Because the boy inside you is still waiting, not for a woman, but for the man who will finally speak the truth. And when that man emerges, silence becomes sacred again. Not a sentence, but a choice. You thought it was her laugh, her body, her energy, but it wasn't. It was the version of yourself she allowed you to pretend to be. The man with charm, purpose, mystery, if only for a moment. She saw you in a way you hadn't seen yourself in years, and that illusion felt like resurrection. You weren't in love, you were high on reflection. She didn't complete you, she amplified your potential. You called it chemistry, but it was identity theater. She was the mirror, you were the actor, and the applause you craved was hers. Jung saw it clearly. What you fell in love with was your own possibility. She was just the screen you projected it onto. That's why her absence didn't just hurt, it erased you. Because when she left, so did the man you only knew through her eyes. And what remained? The echo of a performance without an audience. You weren't addicted to her presence, you were addicted to being visible, to feeling seen, even if it was filtered through fantasy. She didn't love you. She loved the story you wrote around her attention, and you clung to that story like it was your only script. Every time she praised you, it felt like oxygen. Every time she went silent, you gasped. You gave her the pen and waited to be written. But no one can write your worth for you. And the more you waited, the more you vanished. You weren't chasing her, you were chasing who you felt like when she looked at you a certain way. But identity borrowed from others always has interest, and eventually she stopped paying it. Now you're bankrupt, not in love, but in self. Stop chasing the mirror. Return to the man who doesn't need an audience to feel real, the man who doesn't perform, doesn't adapt, doesn't kneel. Because when you become sovereign, you don't need her to see you. You become the presence no one can ignore, including yourself. You weren't addicted to her. You were addicted to the escape hatch she offered from your own silence. The moment you stop outsourcing identity, you stop craving validation like it's heroin, and that's when the real man begins to emerge, not because she crowned him, but because he did. You thought she left because you weren't enough. But the truth is more brutal. You gave too much and required nothing. You turned love into a function. Serve, soothe, sacrifice. You became the emotional butler of the relationship, always on call. And eventually, she walked out of the mansion you built in her name. You didn't love her. You performed love in hopes that she'd finally notice your devotion. But overgiving isn't generosity. It's control-wearing perfume. You wanted to be irreplaceable, so you made yourself invisible. And she left because there was no one left to connect with. She didn't reject your love. She rejected the absence inside it. Because it wasn't intimacy. It was imbalance, a monologue disguised as a gift. You gave her your time, your energy, your plans, but you never gave her your presence. Jung taught that when one inner voice is silenced, the other suffocates. And that's what happened. You silenced yourself to keep her close. You let her fill the space where your needs should have lived. You called it devotion, but she felt it as distortion because she didn't want everything. She wanted something real. You weren't betrayed. You were ignored by yourself. And what you called selflessness was just self-erasure. You hoped your sacrifice would inspire loyalty. But no woman stays for a man who disappears every time she enters the room. She left, not because she stopped loving you, but because she couldn't find you anymore. Your love became a theater, not a conversation. And eventually, the curtains closed. She didn't want the spotlight. She wanted someone to share the stage, not someone who bowed after every scene. She wanted contrast, not compliance. You were a giver, but you weren't a presence. You thought showing up was enough, but she needed you to take up space, not just provide it. Love isn't measured by quantity. It's defined by tension, polarity, voice. And the moment you reclaim your voice, the dynamic shifts. Not because you ask for power, but because you finally bring your weight back into the room. She didn't want to dominate. She wanted to feel you, and you never let her. You weren't drawn to her unpredictability by accident. It was the noise that kept your silence at bay. The chaos she brought, the arguments, the mood swings, the emotional hurricanes, they gave your life a pulse you couldn't find alone. Because when she wasn't screaming, the void inside you was. Stillness felt unbearable, not because it hurt, but because it revealed. The moment she was gone, the noise stopped, and you were left with a man you couldn't recognize without the war. You didn't crave her affection, you craved her drama. Jung said the shadow isn't always darkness, sometimes it's noise, a noise we create to drown out the call of the soul. She was your distraction, your anesthesia, your excuse to stay unconscious. You called her wild, but she was your ritual, the ritual that spared you from facing the ache beneath your ambition. Every fight felt like fire, and you mistook the burn for passion. But it wasn't intimacy, it was insulation. Each argument protected you from the one question you couldn't answer. Who am I, without her chaos to define me? You blamed her instability, her inconsistency, her emotional floods. But the truth is, you needed them. Because every time she exploded, you didn't have to sit with your own silence. You didn't have to ask why life felt hollow, even when calm. She was the storm that gave your numbness a reason to feel alive. You didn't escape her. You escaped the stillness she used to shield you from. You called it love, but it was just a way to avoid solitude. Because solitude speaks, and what it says scares most men into lifelong relationships with their distractions. But don't confuse emptiness with failure. It's not proof you're broken. It's proof you've stopped pretending. That stillness, that's your shadow's language. And if you listen carefully, it won't destroy you. It will guide you back to the parts of yourself you locked away long ago. She was never your addiction. She was your echo chamber, the place where your fear could scream and call itself romance. But the deeper truth is this: you were never afraid of losing her. You were afraid of meeting yourself in silence. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. She called you a king, and you spent the rest of the relationship trying not to lose the crown, not by leading, but by performing, by being agreeable, accommodating, impressive. You became a stage version of yourself, polished, hollow. It felt good at first, that praise, that admiration, like someone finally saw the greatness you suspected might be in you. But over time, the compliment became a collar. You stopped being real, started being worthy of her approval, her affection, her definition of you. Jung said the persona is the mask we wear to survive society, but sometimes that mask becomes who we think we are. You weren't loved. Your mask was the strong, charming, untouchable man, and the real you. He started disappearing behind the performance. Every time she praised your strength, you buried your doubt. Every time she admired your control, you silenced your chaos. And you thought, this is what love demands. But love doesn't demand a role. It demands presence, even if it trembles. She never asked you to be perfect, but you assumed it was the price for staying adored. So you censored your sadness, your rage, your need. You chose image over intimacy, and then wondered why she felt far away, even in your arms. She didn't love you. She loved your performance, the hero, the provider, the calm storm. And when you started slipping even slightly, you panicked. Not because she'd leave, but because you had no script left. You forgot how to be a man without the costume. You became her praise, not your presence. And the more you tried to maintain that image, the more your soul started whispering, "This isn't me." But the whisper wasn't loud enough to break the spell. Now you're here, crown in hand, exhausted. Not because you failed her, but because you abandoned the man she never even got to meet. It's time to dismantle the role and meet yourself, not as a king, but as a man, finally unmasked. You were never taught how to simply exist. You were taught to earn. To be respected, you had to perform. To be loved, you had to provide. To be a man, you had to disappear into function. You became useful before you became real. A provider, a protector, a fixer. And every time you met a woman, you offered yourself as a solution. Not a presence, not a soul, a service. And then wondered why you felt like a product no one chose freely. Jung believed that masculinity and femininity must be integrated within, but you outsourced your worth, handed it to her like an invoice. You made your masculinity a currency, and she paid you in temporary validation. The moment you stopped performing, the transaction ended. You called it a relationship, but it was a contract, signed in silence, desperation, and fear. You did everything right, showed up, worked hard, stayed strong. But deep down, you feared that if you ever stopped doing, you'd stop being in her eyes. That's not love. That's self-abandonment sold as sacrifice. You weren't building connection. You were buying safety, emotional protection in exchange for obedience. And the irony, she didn't ask for all of it. She just stopped respecting you because you gave it before she earned it. Your masculinity isn't a marketing strategy. It's not a checklist, not a favor, not a performance. It's a presence that needs no permission. But you let her negotiate it with praise, with withdrawal, with need. And you adjusted like a puppet just to keep the illusion intact. She didn't fall out of love with you. She fell out of the role you built around her validation, because somewhere along the way you forgot this. Presence doesn't perform, it doesn't ask, it is. and she can't respect what you won't embody without applause. You were never a man to her. You were an agreement, a set of conditions designed to keep the chaos quiet. But now the question is simple. Will you keep selling your worth or finally start owning it? Because only one of those paths leads to peace. So now you know. It wasn't her silence that broke you. It was yours. It wasn't her betrayal that ruined you. It was the deal you made with your own absence. She didn't destroy your life. She exposed the blueprint of your self-abandonment. What will you do with that truth? Will you keep chasing women to distract from the man you've never met? Will you keep trading your presence for praise, your purpose for proximity, your peace for permission? Or will you finally sit, alone, undistracted, and ask the only question that matters? What if everything you were looking for in her was just what you abandoned in yourself? Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and keep walking this path toward brutal self-knowledge, emotional sovereignty, and a kind of freedom most men never even know they lost. If she was your mirror, addiction was your escape from it. In the next video, we descend into Jung's rawest truth. That addiction isn't weakness. It's a soul starving for meaning. And the drug? Just a counterfeit ritual for a man who forgot how to come home.